Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Israel and Syria have reached a ceasefire deal after days of violence in the Suwayda province. This, according to a US envoy. Turkey, Jordan and regional actors back the truce, which comes after Israeli strikes in Damascus and demands for Syrian withdrawal to protect Druze communities. Meanwhile, a war monitor says nearly 720 people have died in a week of fighting in Druze-majority Suwayda, including mass executions. The dead include Druze fighters, civilians, government troops and Bedouins, with Israeli strikes also killing 15 soldiers. The Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have signed a ceasefire deal in Qatar, committing to end fighting in eastern Congo. The agreement follows a separate Congolese-Rwandan peace pact signed last month in Washington. South Korea's jailed ex-president Yoon Suk-yeol faces new charges over his 2024 martial law declaration. Prosecutors say he abused authority, erased records and blocked arrests during the crackdown. Gaza officials say at least 26 Palestinians have been killed with over 100 injured in strikes near two southern aid sites. Civil defense spokesman accused Israel of opening fire on areas near Khan Yunis and Rafah. Meanwhile, Hamas's armed wing says it may revert to demanding a full peace deal if current ceasefire talks collapse. Spokesman Abu Ubaida claims Israel has rejected Hamas's offer to release hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire. Donald Trump has filed a $10 billion lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, its owners and Rupert Murdoch over a report linking him to Jeffrey Epstein. Wall Street Journal owner Dow Jones says it stands by its reporting and will vigorously defend against the defamation case. And Russia launches over 300 drones and 30 missiles overnight, hitting Odessa and causing blackouts in the Sumy region. Ukrainian officials say one person has died and a residential building was set ablaze in Odessa during the attack. Meanwhile, Moscow says its air defences intercepted 13 Ukrainian drones in a separate overnight attack. Well, we start this hour in North America as US President Donald Trump has filed a $10 billion defamation lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, its parent companies, and several of its executives and journalists. The suit filed in Miami federal court stems from a recent article linking Trump to a 2003 birthday greeting for the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. According to the Journal, the greeting was part of a collection of letters given to Epstein for his 50th birthday. It allegedly included a typewritten note featuring Trump's name, a crude drawing of a naked woman, and the phrase, "May every day be another wonderful secret." The article also suggested that the drawing bore a Donald Trump signature in a compromising location. Trump, however, has strongly denied writing the note or drawing the image. In another interview, he threatened to sue the newspaper if it published the story. Trump's lawsuit names Rupert Murdoch, Dow Jones, News Corp, Chief Executive Robert Thompson and 2 Wall Street Journal reporters. It accuses them of publishing a false and defamatory story with intent to harm Trump's reputation, both financially and politically. In response, a spokesperson for Dow Jones said the publication stands by its reporting and plans to vigorously defend the article in court. Well, of course, this story has many ramifications and the Jeffrey Epstein conversation has sent ripples through the US. Joining us to discuss this latest development, Ross Feingold, a political analyst who is joining us from Taipei, Taiwan. Ross, as always, thank you ever so much for joining us. Can I please get your first initial thoughts off the back of this huge defamatory and defamation lawsuit that has been issued by Donald Trump?
It's no surprise President Trump threatened to do this if the story was published, and he's proceeded. He's also somebody who has a history, including recently, of suing media organizations. So his reaction, his response comes as no surprise. And also keep in mind that he has deep pockets. He could afford to pay very expensive lawyers a lot of money to pursue this case. And things like pre-trial maneuvering and discussions between the two sides in the United States legal system could go on for quite a long time, could really run up the legal bill. But President Trump doesn't care. Now, winning this type of lawsuit is very difficult. And we should also keep in mind that the defendant here is a very sophisticated organization. They have their own excellent lawyers. They have their own reporting and ethical standards as well. One would have to assume that they wouldn't have gone with the story. They wouldn't have published it unless they actually had proof, because to publish it without proof would be extremely foolish and would open them up to a legal judgment. So this will play out in the coming weeks and months, and it's really going to be interesting to see whether or not the Wall Street Journal actually has the proof.
Yes, and Ross, of course, you mentioned there one defence in the face of a defamation lawsuit is, of course, the truth factor, and it will be interesting to assess the Wall Street Journal's moves next. But let's now look at the wider conversation around Jeffrey Epstein, of course, causing a political headache for Donald Trump. Do you think this move by the Wall Street Journal and this report that they have published will cause him any more issues politically, not just personally to his character?
That's a really interesting question. The political issue at the moment still seems to be the federal government, the Trump administration's Justice Department decision not to release additional information after hinting for months, ever since it took office on January 20th, that more information releases would be forthcoming. Is President Trump going to pay a political price with his supporters because of the Wall Street Journal article? Probably not. He's been known to make crude remarks about women, most famously what was released before the 2016 election. He's survived that. In fact, he got reelected in 2024. Politically, President Trump himself probably won't pay much of a price for the Wall Street Journal article's allegations, that the fact that he may have written a somewhat off-color doodle to Jeffrey Epstein, and it is a reminder that he had a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, but President Trump hasn't denied that. He did say we eventually had a falling out, which does appear to be true. So again, I don't think politically the Wall Street Journal article by itself does much damage to President Trump. But the issue still remains the federal government's announcement that they were not going to release more information about Jeffrey Epstein. That seems to be where President Trump is paying a bit of a political price at the moment with his supporters. Of course, not with his opponents. His opponents don't like President Trump. So whatever President Trump says or does or is accused of doing, that's not going to affect people who don't like him because they already dislike him.
Yes, and Ross, where does this go next? Of course, now there has been a lawsuit. What will be the next steps, and where could this go legally?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that on Friday, the Justice Department did go to the court. They went to the judge that was overseeing the Epstein case, and they have asked for permission to release grand jury transcripts. Now, this is very rare in the United States judicial system. It is possible, and one of the arguments would be, one of the arguments that the federal government will make to the judge is that this is a matter of great or extraordinary public interest, which justifies releasing the grand jury transcript. Now, the release of the grand jury transcripts, and keeping in mind those grand jury discussions way back in 2019, that is what led to Jeffrey Epstein being indicted. So the prosecutors would have presented to the grand jury details about the alleged criminal activity of Jeffrey Epstein, and it was enough information to get an indictment, although getting an indictment from a grand jury in the United States is typically not very difficult. The prosecutors just need to show enough evidence to convince the grand jurors to issue an indictment. It's not the same standard as getting a guilty verdict in an actual trial. But anyway, one important step here is this request for grand jury details to be released. And of course, they'll have to redact the names of victims and some other personal details. But I do think if this is released, it will provide more information for the critics, for those people who are worried or concerned or accusing the government of a cover-up. So that's something to watch, is whether or not the judge in the criminal case of Jeffrey Epstein will agree to release those grand jury transcripts. Now, as far as the Wall Street Journal case, as I said, the pretrial maneuvering is going to take a very, very long time. Some of that will play out in, as we say in America, the court of public opinion. We'll definitely hear the lawyers making accusations about the other side on TV shows, for example. But that process is going to move very, very slowly.
Yes, absolutely. And we, of course, here on NewsX World will keep an eye on all of those developments as they happen. Ross will be staying with us for later in the programme. However, first we head to Africa, and the Democratic Republic of Congo and the M23 rebel group have signed a declaration of principles to end fighting in eastern Congo. As per the text declaration signed in Qatar, Congo and M23 will commit to sign the peace agreement by August the 18th. The signing took place in Doha in Qatar and followed months of Qatari mediation after talks began in April. The US has exerted pressure to finalise a durable peace deal in the volatile country, hoping that it would attract billion SOF dollars in Western investment to a region rich in minerals like gold, cobalt, copper, tantalum and lithium, among others. The African Union said a ceasefire signed between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Rwanda-backed M23 armed group was a significant development. The African Union chairperson, Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, said that it's a major milestone towards efforts to achieve lasting peace, security and stability in eastern DRC and the wider Great Lakes region. We now head over to the Middle East, and Syria's government forces have begun deploying across the southern province of Suwayda, where heavy fighting between Druze Bedouin armed groups and government forces has resulted in hundreds of casualties. The Syrian presidency announced a comprehensive ceasefire on Saturday, citing the need to prevent further bloodshed, protecting all minorities and sects in the country. Let's now have a listen to what Syrian leader al-Sharaa had to say.
إننا إذ نشكر العشائر على مواقفها البطولية، لكننا ندعوها إلى الالتزام التام بإيقاف إطلاق النار والامتثال لأوامر الدولة، وعلى الجميع أن يتفهم أن هذه اللحظة تتطلب وحدة الصف والتعاون الكامل من أجل تجاوز ما نمر به جميعا. تلتزم الدولة السورية بحماية الأقليات والطوائف كافة في البلاد، وهي ماضية في محاسبة جميع المنتهكين من أي طرف كان، ولن يفلت أي شخص من المحاسبة. ونحن نتبرأ من جميع الجرائم والتجاوزات التي جرت، سواء كانت من داخل السويداء أو خارجها، ونؤكد على أهمية تحقيق العدالة وفرض القانون على الجميع.
Well, the ceasefire came after a US brokered agreement between Syria and Israel. US Ambassador to Turkey Tom Barrack confirmed that both countries had agreed to a truce supported by regional powers including Turkey and Jordan. The ceasefire aims to end violence in Suwayda, a region with a significant Druze population. Despite the ceasefire, fighting between Druze and Bedouin groups continued on Friday. The Syrian government has redeployed forces to restore order, but the situation remains unstable. The international community is watching closely, hoping the ceasefire could lead to a more lasting peace. Well, welcoming Ross Feingold once again back to join us and talk about this issue, which seems to have come to some conclusion. Ross, let's get your first initial reaction to that announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Syria. And will it actually change the situation on the ground in these regions of Syria that are minority-led?
To take your second question first, is it going to change the situation on the ground? In the coming days, yes. I think the parties, at least as of now, are committed to the ceasefire, so hopefully it will hold for the coming days. Will it hold over the medium or long term? There's really no way to know, and a lot of that really depends on what kind of policies the new Syrian government implements and how this new Syrian government demonstrates that it will treat minorities equally as it does treat the Sunni majority. To go back to your first question, one of the things that's really interesting about this process over the past few hours and days is the involvement of the United States, because at first glance, the United States might have taken the view that this is really an internal matter in Syria. It doesn't create much of a risk for regional security. It's not really a risk to the national security of the United States or United States interests in the region. This was really very much localized fighting between Bedouin and the new Syrian government on one side and the Druze minority on another side. However, the United States has taken an interest in ensuring for lack of a better word, the success of the new Syrian government. President Trump met with the president when Trump was in the Middle East. President Trump really didn't have to do that, but he wanted to make some gesture to the new government. It was probably at the request of Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf countries, and President Trump agreed to do that. And in addition, the United States has removed sanctions that had been in place on Syria, which really is another gesture towards the new government that the United States, as of now, wants it to succeed. And then finally, we have the involvement of the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey, who's also a special envoy for Syria, Ambassador Barak. So the United States seems really committed to ensuring a peaceful Syria at the moment. And one part of that then becomes putting pressure on Israel to agree to the ceasefire. Because, we might have taken the view that the Trump administration is such a strong supporter of Israel and has such good relations with Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States would have just given Israel a free hand to conduct military operations in southern Syria. But it appears that the United States did put some pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire.
Yes, and Ross, just quickly before we do move on, I want to build on the point that you've made about sanctions. Of course, Syria facing over a decade of regional instability and the ousting of Bashar al-Assad after such a long time in the grips of a civil war. Do you think that move by some Western nations to lift sanctions on Syria may have come too soon, given the instability that we're now seeing play out still in the country following those decisions?
Certainly there were cynics. If we go back to last December when the change in government occurred, when Bashar Assad fled the country, there were cynics who said that given the recent or long-term history, Syria is a country that needs a strong leader. Otherwise, you're going to have chaos with minorities who do have weapons fighting to preserve their safety in the face of what might be a vindictive majority after the majority Sunnis were repressed for so many decades by Assad the father and Assad the son. So there certainly were people who warned against this situation, and they said, well, we should go slow on sanctions relief because the new government needs to really show that it's going to be a government for all Syrians and not just for the Sunni majority. But I think there's some key players, stakeholders in this discussion, and that's Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. I don't think they want to see any more chaos in Syria. They've had enough of that. They may have had parties that they favored and armed groups that they favored over the preceding 10 years of civil war. But I think the Gulf states are very much incentivized to see Syria recover. We have the recent investment commitment from Dubai for the Syrian ports, and that's a positive step. And I think they're just tired of chaos. They're tired of refugees. They're tired of people dying. So I think the Arab countries of the Gulf states specifically, they want to see Syria succeed. So I think they provided that feedback to the Trump administration and to European countries as well, that the sanctions should come off sooner rather than later.
Ross, thank you ever so much for that deep insights. Thank you for your time. We will, of course, continue to monitor the situation in Syria and bring you all related updates. But now we move to South Korea, where 4 people have died and over 1,300 people have been forced to evacuate as relentless rainfall continues to batter South Korea, with officials warning that the unusual downpour is far from over. Among the victims were 2 men in their 80s, one of whom is believed to have died while trying to drain floodwater from his basement. Another man was killed when a wall collapsed onto his car just after he had called his wife to say his vehicle was being swept away. A fourth person died from cardiac arrest. In Ceaasefire, the hardest hit city on the west coast, over 400 millimetres of rain fell in just 12 hours, an event the weather agency described as happening once in a century. Authorities also reported several injuries, including 2 people with hypothermia and 2 others with leg injuries. Well, joining us to discuss this extremely difficult situation and deadly rainfall leading to those evacuations, Sanjay Kumar is a journalist joining us from Seoul, the South Korean capital. Thank you very much, Sanjay, for taking the time to speak with us. What is the current public reaction in South Korea after this deadly, tragic natural disaster?
As you can see in the background, still it is raining and downpouring is not frequent, but once in a time it is happening, and not 4 but 5 people have already been reported to be died, and many of them are still missing. 4 are the numbers which is being said by the officials, but I'm sure that many more are going to be among the dead and missing. What is more concerning is that many people in Korea, and especially in the countryside in the South Chungcheong and Gyeongsang province, they are not able to return to their homes. Seoul looks a bit normal because, you know, the infrastructure in terms of transportation is quite good in Seoul, and not many landslide areas are here inside Seoul. But outside Seoul, many areas are prone to have landslide. And you know, when landslide happens, it is very difficult for the authorities to find the bodies and even the people, and especially for old people. You know, Korea has a majority of old people living in countryside. They are also facing a lot of problems because of that, because for them, it is very difficult to move to other areas. Although more than 7,000 people have been evacuated, but they are leaving their houses, and you know, like, it's very difficult when you leave your house and stay in a different place. So it is not normal yet, and rain is continuously happening. This is also very concerning, and we can only pray in this moment. And authorities are, like, day and night, they are working. The Fire and Safety Agency also is trying its best. Government is also very alarmed. But despite all these, situation is still not normal because rainfall is still happening.
Yes, and Sanjay, thank you for clarifying some numbers there. I just want to let our audience know that what we are showing on screen right now, these are, of course, reported numbers, but we do expect potentially those to rise as those operations continue. Sanjay, just before we let you go, we've heard that this is an event that is once in a century, and also, of course, rainfall at this level not regularly seen. Are there questions being raised of how this event is being handled with, and whether the government or previous government, as we know there is a new leader, could have done more to prevent such widespread destruction and 5 deaths potentially turning into many more?
Well, the president is having this zero tolerance approach to this. He is newly elected president, and he has got his ratings almost 64%. He doesn't want to give any chance to opposition leaders to make hue and cry over this. And surprisingly, even and not only the government, but the opposition party leadership is also trying their best. They are going to help people also to evacuate and help as much as they can. So I think opposition and the ruling party both, they are seeing it as a national disaster moment, and they are not accusing each other on this. So political things are not happening right now. So it is a good gesture, I should say, to have a national response. And President has reiterated again and again that all the all the personals, all the national agencies must have to be intact and collectively respond to this emergency-like situation. This is the situation.
Yes, Sanjay Kumar, thank you ever so much for joining us and providing that insight. We will, of course, continue to bring you all of the developments from the ongoing situation in South Korea. But we do move on now, and thousands of Afghans whose personal details were leaked to Britain are not expected to receive any compensation. As per reports, the MOD will also not proactively give small payouts to people whose lives were put in danger after the February leak. The names and details of more than 19,000 people were leaked, with many Afghans now saying they fear retribution from the Taliban. Reports suggest that the largest lawsuit is being prepared by Barings Law, a firm that has more than 1,000 Afghan clients. However, it's unclear how many of those clients are currently in Afghanistan. The leak occurred when an unnamed official emailed a spreadsheet outside of the government team processing Afghan relocation applications, and it made its way into the public domain. More than 100 British officials, including members of the Special Forces and MI6, were compromised in the same data breach. Well, joining us to discuss this development, Shruti Dasgupta, an international affairs expert, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Shruti, as always, for taking the time to speak with us. Let's first look at the context of this situation. A big data breach, an important data breach given the extremity of the situation and safety concerns. Before we dissect potential lawsuits, what's your initial thoughts on what happened and now how it's being dealt with?
Greetings. Thank you so much for inviting me. The data breach happened in 2022. By 2023, it was published on Facebook. A partial list was published on Facebook. And thereafter, we've seen injunction after injunction, a super injunction to protect media from talking about this data breach. So while they were trying to control the spill out of the actual loss of data and the administrative efforts behind it, they also gagged the media from talking about this lapse of security that occurred there. Now, later on, let's say around 2024, the super injunction had to be reviewed every 3 months, and now they have lifted the injunction, and where the government has apologized and accepted that there was a data breach. And after the list went public, partial list went public in 2023, they instituted something called an Afghanistan response route, where they started relocating those Afghanis that were part of their network. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them were relocated to UK. They were through the special Afghanistan response route, so that their lives, which could have been in danger because they were working for the UK in the 20-year war of Afghanistan, they can be protected. But despite agreeing to all of that, you can understand that their lives still stand at danger, and they're not just theirs, but their extended family and relatives that do continue to stay in Afghanistan due to whatever circumstances, they continue to be in danger. And this is something which has caused a fallout, which has now resulted in a lawsuit being prepared against the government itself.
Yes, absolutely, Shruti. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but of course here on NewsX World we will continue to bring you all updates and further reports into potential suits that may take place. But now it's time for us to take a look at the latest news from the Indo-Pacific region. Ousted South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol has been indicted on new criminal charges linked to his controversial declaration of martial law roughly 3 months after his removal from office. The fresh charges mean Yoon will remain in custody for up to 6 more months as he awaits trial at the Seoul Central District Court over his December 3 martial law imposition, which triggered significant political unrest across the country. Myanmar's military leader has made a rare public appearance on Saturday at a ceremony honouring General Aung San, the country's independence hero and father of detained former leader Aung San Suu Kyi. It marked the first time 69-year-old senior General Min Aung Hlaing participated in the Martyrs' Day wreath-laying ceremony since the military overthrew Suu Kyi's civilian government in February 2021. His appearance comes amid ongoing efforts by his troubled government to organise elections while combating armed resistance through the nation. Slightly radioactive but decontaminated soil from Fukushima was brought to the Japanese Prime Minister's office, marking its first official reuse outside of testing. The move is intended to demonstrate the soil's safety. This is the first time such soil has been used in a public setting since the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster, when a massive earthquake and tsunami caused a meltdown that released radioactive material and contaminated the surrounding region. Well, that is all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.